Tape recorder is on. We are now on the record. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is Mike Thompson. I'm a supervisor with the Department of Natural Resources, Bureau of Environmental Analysis and Sustainability, and I've been assigned to conduct tonight's hearing. The purpose of this hearing is to receive comments on a revised draft water level order for Lake Koshkonong. I ask that everyone please sign in the lobby and let us know whether or not you intend to provide an oral comment at this hearing. Please sign in using the appearance slips available at the tables in the lobby, even if you do not want to speak at this hearing, so that we have an accurate record of who attends. The Department of Natural Resources has set this time and place, 5 to 8 p.m., June 22, 2017, at the Edgerton High School Performing Arts Center, 200 Elm High Drive, Edgerton, Wisconsin, for a public informational hearing on the draft water level order for Lake Koshkonong. The purpose of this hearing is to hear comments from members of the public on the draft water level order for Lake Koshkonong. This is not a contested case hearing. It is not an adversarial hearing. The hearing has been noticed through news releases, the DNR website, and 1,155 emails to Lake Koshkonong, Indian Ford Dam, GovDelivery subscribers. In lieu of, or in addition to oral comments at tonight's hearing, written comments will be accepted by the department through June 27, 2017. Written comments, as you can see on the screen, should be sent to Mr. Rob Davis, DNR, sitting next to me, at the mailing or electronic email address on the hearing notice and the fact sheet. Written statements will have the same weight and effect as oral statements presented at tonight's hearing. Before we take public testimony, I'll ask Russ Rasmussen of the department to provide an overview of the draft water level order for Lake Koshkonong. Russ?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all very much for coming. And thank you all very much for your interest in the resource. I think we at DNR share this interest and are trying to find a way that we can manage this resource with all of the different perspectives in mind and trying to keep all of the different perspectives, all the different uses that people have in mind. I want to go over a little bit about the history, about how we reached, how we got to where we're at today. And so I'll go way back in time, and I apologize because probably many of you know a lot more about this than I do. A lot of you have probably spent your lives living on this or near this resource. So it's something that I've been involved with for probably about 4 or 5 years when Secretary Stepp asked me to coordinate our department efforts on this. So the dam at Indian Ford was initially authorized by the Wisconsin Territorial Legislature in 1843. And it wasn't actually constructed until 1851. And it's had legal actions regarding the water level at this dam and the management of this dam every 30 or 40 years since. And it's been through a cycle. Those of you that had attended the Lake District meeting, I described this then back in August of last year, where it goes through this cycle of, okay, we have this water level, and it starts to silt in, basically. And so somebody wants the water level to be raised. Somebody else opposes the raising of that water level. There is quite often legal action, adjudication, and then finally there's some sort of settlement. And almost invariably, there is a statement saying, this is the last time we're going to have to do this. We've finally reached an agreement, and now it's set. And so then about 30 or 40 years later, it silts in. Somebody wants to raise the water level. Somebody opposes the raising of the water level. there's legal action, there's finally a settlement, and there's a statement that, yep, now we've got it, and now there won't ever have to be any more. We finally settled this, and it goes for another 30 or 40 years, and this whole cycle starts all over again. We're trying to get off this treadmill, and I would stipulate that if 1/4 of the time and effort and money that has been spent on legal fees and arguing over this had been actually spent to improve the resource, we would be light years further along in the quality of the lake, the quality of the wetlands, the quality that we have here of the natural resource. So we're trying again to get off this treadmill. So we came up with a settlement agreement that was negotiated between the parties to the latest lawsuit. Those may have those of you would know that back in 2003 there was a request by the Lake District to raise the water levels 7 inches or 8 inches, depending on where you start the measurement, all year round, and so that was denied by the department, although the department allowed some raising of the water level in the winter. And so that, again, started the legal action and went all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court made a decision and said, department, you didn't consider the economic testimony, the economic parts of this issue, and so you have to reconsider this, considering the economic parts. So we took that and did that, and talked with the Lake District, talked with the, I guess I would call it the wetlands associations and the hunting clubs that were opposed to the raising of the water levels, and came up with a settlement. It's a compromise, and like any compromises, there's things in it that any individual can go along with, and things in it that they probably don't like. So, but hopefully overall we have a plan moving forward that we can manage this resource in a more collaborative fashion going forward. And I realize that there's probably a lot of, I would say, hard feelings on both parts and both sides, depending on where you're at. And there's certainly more than 2 perspectives here. But hopefully we can work through those and manage this, get to a point where we're managing this resource from a standpoint of collaboration and trying to address and recognize all the different uses and perspectives that this resource offers. And so that's our hope. And so this settlement agreement has 4 parts. And the first one I would call is dam operation and maintenance. And where are we with that? Because that has been a concern of many people. And so we did receive a dam operation and maintenance plan from the district, correct, Rob? Yes, this spring. And I would note that, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So that was part of the settlement agreement, that they would supply that. We do have that. Another part of that would be, as you probably all know, one of the bones of contention in this whole issue is the operation of the wicket gate portion of the dam. So you have the slide gates on one side, you've got the fixed spillway in the middle, and then you have the old power plant, which has wicket gates. And those have been in various states of functionality over the years. And so we were trying to address that concern. And not only do you have the wicket gates that have malfunctioned in the past, but you have the trash racks that are designed to protect those wicket gates from trash and logs and things coming in and damaging them and keeping those clean. And so we have folks that say they're not being kept clean. We have folks that say they are being kept clean. And it's since it goes down, about 13 feet, and the water is rushing and somewhat murky sometimes, it's hard to be able to really tell what the accurate assessment is of the trash racks. So one of the things that we have asked for is consideration of replacing those wicket gates with slide gates. The disadvantage of that is the cost of doing that in the first place. The advantage of that would be it would be very visible to everybody. You go out and look and see if the slide gates are operating properly. They would be much easier to operate, much less. You wouldn't have trash racks to keep clean. And so there would be some sort of amortization of the cost over the years in less maintenance and more transparent operation of the dam. And we could, it's a competitive grant. I understand it's in the budget, if they ever pass it, that it's been funded. So we have a dam maintenance, a municipal dam maintenance grant program that could pay for up to half of the cost of replacing the wicket gates. And one of the key factors of being eligible for that is to have this operation and maintenance plan that we have. So we're on track, and I know that the district has had their consultant come and talk to us, to our folks, to Rob. So they're proceeding to take a look at that, and I think getting some estimates of what that might cost. In the meantime, however, in the order that we're looking at tonight, we do have a stipulation that the district provide the department with direct visual access to the wicket gates starting this year. I think it's upon request, but and then biennially thereafter, which is about. It's quite a process to pick up the old covers to the old generator compartments, and so that we can actually review the wicket gates to make sure that they're operating properly. So that when the lever says they're half open, they're actually half open, and when it says they're all the way open, they're all the way open. When it says that they're closed, they're closed. And so we will be able to view that directly. That was been one of the concerns, is whether the wicket gates in the past have been not operating properly and whether they would operate properly in the future. So, of course, that all becomes moot if they become replaced with slide gates. So that's the dam maintenance and operation is one of the components of this settlement agreement, and that's part of what we're talking about tonight. Some of the components of this are in this order. The second was a stepped raising of the water levels in the summer. As I mentioned before, the original request was a 7 or 8 inch increase in the water levels all year round. And our initial decision granted a smaller increase in the winter. And as we looked at it, what this order does is it provides a 2.6 inch raise in July of 2017, so in a few weeks. From the maximum level now, which is 776.33, to a maximum of 776.55. And it also authorizes another 2.4 inches in June of 2019, starting June 15th specifically, to 776.75. And that's if we find that there's no significant impacts on the wetlands and on the resources from this initial 2.6 inch raise. So, and I would note that the 776.75, why that was picked, was that is, as part of the Supreme Court case, there was a chart that nobody has disputed. It's in the evidence. It's taken as fact, so we're taking it as fact. That listed the average water levels of every year from 1965 to 2002. And when I was looking at this and trying to figure out where, what are some possible logical places to set water levels, and one of the arguments being made was, well, these water levels have been sort of higher than the 776.2 target for years, and so you should take that into consideration. So we looked at that, and we looked at this chart that was in the Supreme Court case, talked to our statisticians who told me that you have a list of averages here, and the proper way to sort of set a mark based on a list of averages is to take the median. meaning there's as many points above as there are below the number that you pick. And so 776.75 is the median. In fact, I looked at this morning and counted, and of the years in that chart, there were 18 years that were above, there were 17 years that were below, and there was 1 year that was right on it. So that's why we picked that number. That's been that's the median of the historical average water levels that have existed since 1965, at least to 2002. And the reason for that is because, as you recall, this original request came in 2003. So that brings me to the third part of this agreement, which is the evaluation part. Because if you recall that even though the second step, the 2.4% inches that gets raised in addition in June of 2019 occurs unless the department finds there's a significant adverse impact to the wetlands in the area, and that it would be impacted by the water levels. So we need to evaluate that. So we have an evaluation plan. We've started the evaluation. Our folks were out there last week to try to set a baseline. They were out there last fall to a certain extent. And actually, we're going to do some LiDAR flyovers this coming fall once the leaves are off the trees so we can really see. I was talking to our folks, and that wouldn't matter. We'll still get accurate data for our evaluation come this fall. We are going to do these evaluations every 2 years, because this is kind of a long-term type of affair. And of course, we will do one before the June 2019 date comes into play. But we'll continue to do these evaluations for a 10-year period. That's part of this agreement. Like I said, every 2 years, because the impacts aren't seen from 1 year to the next in general. They're more long-term if they occur. So, and it's a very real possibility, not real possibility, it's a possibility, let's put it that way, that if we find that these higher water levels are in fact having a significant adverse impact, that we could consider lowering them back down to some level. I don't want to speculate what that might be, but that's in there. Finally, and I think this is maybe one of the more important pieces, the fourth piece is the comprehensive plan. The idea here is that we get together and talk about a plan for the resource. And rather than wait till it gets all silted up again, and now you have people hitting their props and people having to have 300-foot piers and that sort of thing, and going through this all over again in another 20 or 30 or 40 years, that we have a plan to try to deal with this as it goes. This is a dynamic system. Things change. And this should be kind of something that's looked at and managed on a regular basis. We have a starting point. In 2012, there was a plan that was put together by Montgomery and Associates in conjunction with our agency, in conjunction with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to at least have a starting point. And so rather than reinvent the wheel, we're proposing to start with that. And but it's certainly going to be adapted and looked at and have a very public process, similarly to how it was created in the first place. And that would be an ongoing thing that would need to be done to adjust. So you try some, so you say you're going to dredge in this area, and you use those dredge spoils to maybe protect some wetlands or to restore some wetlands in another area. How did that work? If it worked well, then you do it again. If it didn't work well, you try something else. But that's the idea of this comprehensive kind of ongoing adaptive management plan for the resource. And if we can get people to the table to talk through this so that all the different perspectives, all the different uses, all the different reasons that people love this resource are considered, and and talked through, and we can work on this on a collaborative basis rather than a sort of a legal basis, I think we will be much further ahead. So that's the idea. Again, what we're talking about tonight is basically the dam maintenance plan and the water levels and how that would be managed. So the whole idea was to establish a different approach rather than to be in the cycle of requests to raise the water levels, people object to it, you go through legal action, you come up with a settlement, you say, yep, this is going to work forever, and 30 years later, you go through the same cycle again. So, questions, I guess.
It took a lot of dirt into the lake to make the lake go on shelter. How about if we get our dirt back?
And I think that could be something that's part of this plan. There's as far as like I talked about dredging and then returning that back. We have analyzed, by the way, as part of this 2012 study, I think one of the most expensive parts of dredging is what do you do with the spoils? Sometimes you have to haul them if there's contaminated or something. We have not found any levels of contamination of the sort that we couldn't reuse those dredge spoils for to reuse them in the lake or the land surrounding the lake. So that could very well be a possibility, yes. Okay. Yes, sir.
Could you define for me the meaning behind the term negative impact on the wetlands by raising the water level? Seems like to me a contradiction.
The question is,
This will work?
is it working? Yeah, that one's working.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Could you please define for me the meaning of the term negative impact on the wetlands by raising the water levels? Because it seems to me that would improve the wetlands by making them wet.
Okay, I'm not a wetland expert, but I'll do my best to answer your question. What it does has the potential, I don't know if it will or not, that's what we're trying to evaluate, to change the type of wetland it is, to change the functional value of the wetland. So wetlands, when a lot of people think of wetlands, think of a marsh. You got this, shallow water area with some cattails around it, and wetlands are come in many shapes and sizes. And in fact, many of the wetlands, as you probably know, around Lake Koshkonong are forested wetlands. Somewhat rare. There's a lot of big trees, and it's a forest. And certain times of the year when it's dry, you can walk in them. Other times of the year when it's wet, you'll be up to your ankles. So, and so we need to look at, all right, if the water level's being raised through the summer by 2.5 inches, is that going to kill a lot of trees? Is that going to cause rescission, basically, of the wetlands, so it gets a lot smaller, so the lake sort of encroaches upon them? And we're going to have to determine that. And how much does that happen? And I think the department's going to have to make a decision as to whether we feel, because you can't say, okay, if it's 5 feet, that's a significant adverse impact, or if it's 10 feet, you can't really do that. We're going to have to look at, that's why we took this baseline, you're going to have to kind of take a look at where we were, what it's looking like now. Is it caused by the water levels? For example, a lot of those trees in those forests are ash. You got emerald ash borer coming, if you don't have it already. That's going to impact those trees. And so, if you have a forest that's 60, 70% ash, you're going to lose those ash trees for you lost them if you lowered the water levels. So, we have to take those types of things into account, as well as where the water levels are.
One last comment. I think this week we finally hit the 7.74 water level. It's been higher than that since last fall. Will these wetland evaluations take that into account Because those wetlands that we're worried about at the level that we're at today have been above that since last fall.
I mean, yeah, as we took a baseline last week, you know, certainly where the water levels were, we're taking into account. We're also looking, we're not just using last week's analysis. We're going to be looking at, there's been studies done in this area for years. And so there was some pretty comprehensive studies done back in 2005, 2006, and we'll utilize some of that data as well in our evaluation. Yes, sir.
My name's Gary Shackelford. I'm a member of the Lake District. I have a comment and a question regarding what will go into be in the content of the new operating order, what actually will be stated explicitly in it. And it has to do with the issue of the secondary economic impacts. As I understand it, the main, in fact, pretty much the sole reason that the case was remanded by the Supreme Court back to the Circuit Court and then to the DNR was failure of the DNR initially to consider secondary economic impacts. And in the handout that I've read, it mentions the fact that the DNR considered a study that was commissioned by the Lake District. They didn't mention that, I mean, but it was one by the LKWA, and then the data that had been submitted in the earlier submission way back at the beginning of the whole proceedings, but that were not considered by the administrative law judge, Judge Coleman. And in numbered paragraph 17, all it says is that the DNR considered the secondary economic impacts. As far as I can see, the basis for any change in the original denial should be, what did you find regarding secondary economic impacts? All it says is that they were considered, but you haven't said what the finding was. Since there is a change over what the initial operating order denial was, then I think it's a fair assumption to say that the DNR found that there was, in fact, a negative secondary economic impact. I would like to ask you to tell us what those impacts were that caused you to change the decision, and I would like to urge the DNR to explicitly put that in the new operating order or to put it out somewhere as a matter of public record, because the whole change seems to me to hinge on the secondary economic impacts. But I, for one, am completely in the dark as to what your findings were regarding that. So what did you find out about the secondary economic impacts that caused you to change the order?
Well, I'm not an economist. In general, we, as you said, we looked at a variety of reports that were submitted to us. One of the reports basically tried to establish that there were impacts on the home values based on the water levels and based on the ability to use the resource. Things like having to have a 300-foot pier, things like having things too shallow for safe boating in some areas. There were access to boat landings mentioned, access to businesses surrounding that. Affects tourism and the number of people that might use those businesses. There were discussions, and then we had another study that said, at least as far as the home value thing, that really didn't exhibit an increase in or any impact in home values. But those were the types of things that we considered.
This is the last comment I'll make, but the members of the public may not know that the report of the secondary economic impacts that was commissioned by the LKWA said that there were no negative secondary economic impacts. I believe that the report that was commissioned by the RKLD said that there were. So in reading between the lines, I'm taking it that you are accepting the report that is commissioned by the RKLD, but not not considering valid the argument that was commissioned by the LKWA. Is that correct?
No.
Because I still haven't heard an explicit answer to my question, what do you feel that these were negative secondary economic impacts? And I won't get into any more of a discussion. This is all that I'll say. Thank you.
We've got, like you pointed out, conflicting testimony. Those two studies focused on home values. There was very limited data and very limited discussion in both of those studies on things like impacts to businesses surrounding them. So those were aspects of the impacts that we had to look at other information about, including just interviews with business owners. So those focused on home values. One study said there was an impact on a negative impact on home values, another said it wasn't. So it's a matter of us trying to, sort that out. Had we rejected one over the other, we would have made a different decision. We would have made a decision either consistent with our initial decision of no increase of the water levels at all, or we would have made a decision perhaps that, yes, there should be a raising of water levels 8 inches all year round. We took a more moderate approach and tried to come up with, in the plan that you have now, is a 2.6 inch increase from basically the summer months, and lowering it in the fall, winter, and spring. So we have a raising of the water levels for essentially 2.5 months of the year, 3.5 months of the year, I'm sorry, and consistent approach to the rest of the year. So given that, and we want to analyze, like I said, and evaluate what are the impacts to the wetland functions surrounding the lake, and if we find that there are significant adverse impacts based on even that more modest water level increase, we won't allow any further, or we'll back it down. What the order says is that there's a 2.6 increase. If we find that there is a significant adverse impact, it doesn't go any higher, and it also mentions that we may issue a new order. And so I can't predict what that might be until we get some results from our evaluation. So this was an attempt, like I said, it is also partially a compromise. So there's going to be things in it that people don't like and things in it that people can accept. And so, like with any compromise, it's not going to be perfect for any one individual, I don't think. It isn't perfect for us either. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Russ, just before you step off the stage, I had a note passed to me about a typo in one of our documents on the DNR webpage that maybe you could offer some clarification on.
Right, there was a typo in paragraph 4 of the draft order that we changed on Monday. It was pointed out to us on Monday, and we changed it on Monday. So the first reference to what it basically did, it referenced paragraph 3, and it should have referenced paragraph 2. What paragraph 4 basically said, and I'm talking off the top of my head here, but I read it enough, I think I can remember most of it. It said that's the provision that says if we find a significant adverse impact from the water levels that are initially raised, you don't go to the second raising. The initial water levels are in paragraph 2. And so, but we mistakenly put in paragraph 3, which wouldn't even taken place yet. And so we made that change. And so how I've described the water level and how the settlement is accurate in the revised order. Okay.
Great, thank you, Russ. So we'd like to hear more of your comments. I'll be calling up people that have provided appearance slips. When I call your name, please come up to the microphone and offer your comments. Our first speaker is Mr. Steve Proud, followed by Susan Yates.
Thank you and good evening. And Russ, thank you very much. Agree with your comments very much that there's so much we could be doing in a collaborative effort to make this better for everybody that's involved. And I do have just a couple of comments. And one is that, you know, while it's about time that the DNR does recognize the need to raise summer water levels, this really is just a start, but does not go far enough in increasing the summer water levels. My second point is it is disappointing that the DNR has focused so much effort and attention on claimed wetland impacts and so little on navigation, property values, and economic impact of Lake Koshkonong's water level. Third comment, final comment is RKLD representatives should be allowed to participate in any and all wetland studies. Thank you very much.
Next up is Miss Susan Yates, followed by Jennifer Hoppen.
Hi, I'm Susan Yates on White Crow Road in Fort Atkinsons. The majority of people who've studied or worked with this ecosystem agree that this is the bad thing to do and will drastically disrupt the ecosystem. I've been on this lake for 73 years. We've been swimming, canoeing, water skiing, boating, motorboating, snow skiing, ice boating, ice skating, bird watching during the whole time. And we've been able to do this successfully, even at the lower water levels that occurred previously. And I'm now part owner of over 240 acres. And at the proposed water levels, I'll not be able to use 30% of my property. It will be underwater. For the last 15 years, I've been restoring prairies. Much of it will be destroyed, and other areas will not be able to be maintained by the mowing, replanting, nor getting rid of invasives. My paths will be obliterated, and for me, this is a waste of time and many thousands of dollars. As the water levels are increased, the trees along the shore and quite a ways inland die, and as they die, not only is needed habitat removed, but they become part of the obstacles for your bigger boats to run into. My own notes on that. I need it back, yeah.
Thank you. Miss Jennifer Hoppen, followed by Gary Shackelford.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm down at the very end of Minnehaha, and I have 15 acres. As I watch what's gone on in the last 7 years, I've been there 7 years, I agree with what this gentleman had said earlier in that it fills in. It looks to me, having been there, that a combination of the raising of the water level and the dredging is really what will help us down in Gilbert's Bay. But I would like to say as well that I'm very grateful that the two groups, the RKLD and the DNR, are going to work together to solve this and get off of the roller coaster that everybody's been on for so long. And I think it would be important as well for them to be able to participate in those studies of the wetlands so that relationship can become stronger and we can work on making the resource better. And based on the property that I have, again, like this gentleman, I too am interested in taking some of the spoils from dredging if that helps the process and helps save some money, because I know that trucking that stuff out of there is exceptionally expensive. And I have enough property to take some of that. So I'm willing to help in that process as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me pause for a moment before Mr. Shackelford comes up. Anybody that would like to speak tonight, we'd ask that you fill out a slip. I think we've got enough time here. You could come right to the microphone, but if you do speak, please make sure that we get a slip filled out. That helps us maintain proper records. So next up, we have Mr. Gary Shackelford. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shackelford. Next up, we have George, and I'm going to apologize, George Wellencotter.
I'm 66 years old. I was born basically in Indian Ford. My mom and dad built the Hut restaurant in 1950. I've been there, I've worked there, and I own property there for 66 years. I've seen the highs and lows of the Indian Ford Dam. I have pictures here as of June 16th when I talked to Ron Davis about the wicket gates being plugged. It goes on these wicket gates. All I ever hear is all we can do is what we see on top of the water. We can't make Christensen do anything below the water level. There's no maintenance. It's totally ridiculous. Which one, are you Rod Davis? You've been down, Rob, you've been down there with Kim, with the 12-foot pole with the rake before it was dredged out a little bit. You know all that stuff comes from the bottom and it plugs up these wicket gates. They let a third more water through than the floodgates on the other side. If we're going to give somebody 2.5 more inches of water and put us that much closer to a no wake, Memorial Day weekend there was one boat that came down the river because of the no wake. It's an hour and 20 minutes from Indian Ford to the end of the no wake. You're talking about economic problem. Those businesses in Indian Ford get no river business at all in no wake. This water level thing, anytime we're in a no wake, you might as well take everybody with a pleasure boat on the Rock River, no water skiing, no pontoons, everything just goes dead from Newville to Indian Ford. My son lives on the other side of the railroad bridge. He sees it all the time too. I don't see any reason to give anybody more water until they will clean them wicket gates. Christensen was down there at 1:30 after you told him to call me and said, from now on, do not call the DNR every time the wicket gates are plugged. You call me. I said, in the working order, they're supposed to be cleaned daily. It's been 10 days before anything has been cleaned out of there. Christensen quick went down 10 minutes later with his phone, took a video of the blockage. Nothing went on the rest of the day Friday. Nobody came down Saturday and cleaned anything out. Sunday, they finally come down and cleaned out what was plugged on top. Now, it says in the order, every day they're to be cleaned. Why do somebody get away without a citation when that's where the water should be going through? If we're going to give somebody more water and they're not going to maintain these wicket gates and get them out of there, I can't see any. This boom cover here that they put in is ridiculous. I got pictures of it. Under the bridge, all them leaves and all that debris goes against the one on the Fulton side. And you can walk around behind the powerhouse and see how much pressure the one towards off the hook has towards the spillway. It's bubbling up. You got more clearance there. That one towards Fulton is plugged. And Christensen keeps saying, no, everything's 100% wide open. Well, 100% wide open and 50% plugged isn't doing anybody any good. I still say there needs to be one more floodgate put between the powerhouse and the spillway. There's a big void there. If you got to put a caulker dam in to take them wicket gates out, let's show the wetlands and people we mean business. If we're going to give somebody more water, we get these big rains, we ought to be able to say we're going to help you get rid of it. Not sit there for all summer or 6 weeks under no wake when no one can use the river. I think it's ridiculous. I got these pictures. I want to submit them to the DNR. plugging. That boom cover should be on 2 poles that go up and down with the river. Once the river gets low, the gates underneath there stick straight out and everything goes right underneath. They're designed wrong. That shows all the logs stuck there. There was even a pier stuck there when I called Rob last week. That shows the water behind, how it comes out on one and not the other. We need, before any of this goes any farther, we need to take care of this wicket gate problem. That's the deep side of the river where the channel is. So I'm just strongly against doing anything until this wicket gate problem is solved. When I talked to Brian Christensen on Friday, I said, are we applying for the grant money? Twice I asked him, and twice he would not answer that question. Now, we need somebody to work together here, because if we can't get rid of water, why would you give somebody more water and put us in a no-wake that much quicker? There's over 100 homes below the railroad bridge that when the no-wake comes, half the time you can't get under the railroad bridge. So things need to be taken care of with that dam, even if we got to take the powerhouse out and just put gates in before we go any farther. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Protect the shoreline.
And the shoreline.
Yes, please come up to the microphone. And jumped ahead here a little bit. If you could just say your name and things like that as you speak.
Yeah, I will. My name is Scott Purley. I work for Eagle Creek Renewable
And Scott,
Energy.
if you could speak this way so
This way.
it picks up on our microphone.
Thank you. Scott Purley, I work for Eagle Creek Renewable Energy. We operate the dam at Janesville and Beloit and Indian and Rockton and a couple of more. I have 7 that I oversee. And I just wanted to, I don't have a dog in this fight at all, other than to say, with regard to cleaning wicket gates and keeping them open, it's not a big deal. We do it all the time, every day. and the gentleman's right. You really need to clean these there. We used to operate that plant at one point or another, and they need to be attended to. It varies, but probably every other day. It's quite simply a manpower thing. They're not difficult gates to deal with there. There's not an unusual debris load there compared to the other things that we've seen and that we deal with every day. I've spoken with them about some different things you can do, different ways to handle that, but it's primarily mechanical. You need a big rake, but you know, you just need people to do it, and you need to make a commitment to doing it. And honestly, I think they need money. They don't have enough money to pay somebody to even a minimum wage to do that. But it's not magic doing these wicket gates. They're easy to keep clean. The trash racks are easy to keep clean, and they should operate just fine. Ours, just a few miles down the river and down the river and down the river, they all operate perfectly all the time anyway. So just a couple of comments on that.
Thank you, Scott. And I'll be encouraging people to come up and speak. We have time, but let me take a pause before our next speaker and just apologize to the group. Let me introduce our DNR staff that are here this evening. We have Rob Davis and Meg Galloway of DNR Dam Safety Program. Other DNR staff you can recognize by our wooden name tags. DNR staff, maybe you could just raise our hands so the audience members can see us. We're available to assist you. If you have questions or would like appearance slips, things like that, please let us know. I'd also like to say a big thanks to Paul and the Edgerton High School Theater for hosting us this evening. Wonderful accommodations and a great sound system. Thank you, Paul. So with that, we don't have any more appearance slips, and we've opened up the microphone. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak and comment? Sir? And if you could say your name.
My name is Philip Lennox, L-E-N-O-X. I live on White Crow Road, right at the end of White Crow Road on the west end, right next to the public boat launch, well, canoe launch, I should say. One of the things that bothers me as I watched it through the years, there's been an ongoing effort in the name of erosion control to place large volumes of limestone rocks along the shorelines. And in doing that, these shorelines have closed off quite a few areas that were previously accessible and legally navigable water, particularly the so-called wetlands that the small group of people objecting to higher water are concerned with. The fact that the erosion control, I agree with that 100%. What I don't agree with is formerly accessible and navigable waters being blocked off by these limestone barriers. And you can go over to Charlie's Bluff and see that marsh has been closed off. The marsh just to the west of me has been closed off. All of the marshes have been closed off, and there's no reason to do that. If you want to stop the erosion, you simply put in an overlapping gap in the erosion dikes. Basically, you just overlap them like this so that boats can travel through there. And obviously, these are small craft, because it's never going to be a speedboat, probably mostly canoes. And I get a lot of comments on a Facebook group that it's bird watchers. And I get a fair amount of comments of how they miss access to those areas because in the spring, bird watching in those areas is extremely good. I would request the DNR take a review of these limestone rock barriers, maybe make a move to alter them so that previously navigable waters could be re-accessed by the public to areas which is truly public ground but is now blocked off. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers this evening? Please come up, sir. Mr. Lennox, had you filled out a slip?
I did.
Okay, good.
I originally didn't intend to talk, but okay. I guess I did.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, my name's Roland Knipp, okay, and I'm on Minnehaha, and I've only been here 37 years. And this has been one of the worst lakes I've ever been on. I'm contemplating putting wheels on the bottom of my boat. All right? We get a lot of trash from the river, and this is probably what affects the dams, the wicker gates, everything else, from the DNR land, which has unprotected shoreline, and when it floods, it kills the trees, they fall in, they come downstream. It's just a perpetual erosion, and all the dirt coming down makes everything shallow in the lake. The river's getting shallower. I mean, it's unbelievable how neglected that lake is, and the river, and flood control. Now, if they took some action to protect the shorelines in the river, all right? I watched the whole, it was the south side of the entrance of the river. There used to be a house, electric lines, everything. That all disappeared. I mean, just gone. There's big rocks down there that'll destroy boats, and they have done that. But, I mean, the neglect is unbelievable. I mean, I was a public employee for 38 years, and I worked for the FAA, and if we had this kind of neglect, we'd be in jail. Not to be hard on you guys, but Mendota and the other lakes, they get all the money. We get nothing. And I usually have breakfast with a number of guys that have been duck hunting all their life on this lake. All right, and the duck hunting has gone to pot. I can see why. So, there's a two sides to every story, all right? The young lady that says her land floods and that, well, why? Do you protect your shoreline? Does she protect her shoreline? You know, we put in protection, all right, 30 some odd years ago. Otherwise, we would have lost a lot more. The '08 flood probably took, just from my property alone, at least 4 dump trucks, maybe 5 10-wheel dump trucks of dirt, and put them in the lake. All right? And plus, we get the west wind and the ice. All right? Now, the years before we bought the property and that, the ice used to come in and just tear up the top of the soil, keep on coming in. I mean, that ice will pile up 6, 7 feet tall. So that's why everything's so shallow. The lake's been neglected for probably the last 40 years, maybe 50. It's compounded problems. Okay, I'll stop complaining. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm Audrey Gillen, and if I'm not tall enough, can you hear me?
We can, Audrey. Thank you.
Do you want me to turn it down a little? Okay, I've lived on Lake Koshkonong since 1947. I've owned property and still own property on Minnehaha since 1956. Lake Koshkonong was not meant to be a deep lake. It's always been a shallow lake. It's always been a productive lake. It's always drawn tourism. Never been a problem till people want their business to accommodate a lake, or the lake to accommodate the business. The business should be accommodating the lake. So therefore, it's always been a shallow lake. Maybe the DNR should look at other things besides the depth of that lake. Maybe we should look at where are the septic systems going in that lake. If you're going to clean up a lake, you need to clean up the sewers, the sewerage as well. Like I said, I've been out there since 1956. I probably won't be here in the next 10 years when this is still revolving at my age. But I'd like to see that lake cleaned up too, and I'd like to see it start with the sewers. I think the DNR needs to look at that.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Great. And I would ask, if you did speak tonight and you filled out a slip, great. If you didn't, if you could hook up with one of the DNR staff and fill out one of those slips before you leave, that would be greatly appreciated. So let me ask again, after a few moments pause, anyone else who would like to speak or come up and finish their remarks? All right. Then I'll move to the closing. I'd like to remind you all that the department will accept written comments through June 27th, 2017. And again, direct you to the slide with the ways that you can provide those comments. At this time, if there's nothing further, I'd like to thank you all for attending. The hearing is now closed, but the record will remain open through June 27th, 2017 for receipt of written comments. Thank you for attending. We're off the record. Meg, you could pause the microphone or the recording. Thank you, everyone.